Hi, this is Joseph Farah from WND, and I'm here with Dr. Ben Carson, extraordinary American, great brain surgeon turned author, and just a man who has fantastic insight on what's going on in our country today. His new book is called One Nation, What We Can All Do to Save America's Future. Welcome to WND TV,
Thank you.
Dr.
Always
Carson.
good to be with you.
Well, what is the number one thing Americans can do to save America's future?
Well, I think one of the key things is that people have to start talking to each other. Mm-hmm. You know, before people get divorced, what always happens? They stop talking. Mm-hmm. And then the next thing you know, their partner is the devil incarnate. Well, this is what we're doing in this nation right now, getting into our respective corners and demonizing each other and not actually talking, and therefore not actually solving our problems. And, you know, the reason the book is called One Nation is because our strength is derived from our unity. Mm-hmm. And there are elements that don't like our system. They want to change us into the, quote, utopian society. In order to do that, they have to make what we're doing now seem as though it doesn't work. So they drive wedges into every little crack to create a war. War on women, race wars, age wars, income wars, religion wars, you name it, there's a war on it. All of which is straight out of the pages of Rules for Radicals by Saul Alinsky. Mm-hmm. And, you know, what we have to do if we're going to save our nation is rise above it. Stop allowing ourselves to be so easily manipulated. And one of the best ways not to be easily manipulated is to educate yourself. You have to actually know stuff.
Did you have to know stuff to be a brain surgeon, by the way?
I have to know a few things. Absolutely. And actually, you know, the founders of our nation said that our system of government and our freedom is dependent on a well-informed and educated populace. Why did they say that? Because they knew if we weren't like that, that the nature of the country would drastically change quite quickly, because it's inevitable that along would come slick politicians, dishonest media, and people who don't have a good base of knowledge can be easily manipulated. Mm-hmm.
Well, our founders tried to give us a system of government called self-government. Right. And in order to be a self-governing people, they told us, well, you have to have certain, you know, values, and sure. And you do need the knowledge. You need to have an informed public, as you mentioned. And what's lacking today?
What's lacking is the desire mm-hmm. To inform oneself. You know, if you go out on the street and you start talking to people, mm-hmm. and you say to them, "Who sings the happy song?" Most of them will know. Mm-hmm. And you say, "What can you tell me about Benghazi?" They won't know.
Right.
Benghazi, isn't that a singer?
Benghazi.
and these people vote. That's the sad thing. And of course, they have no idea. They go into a voting booth. They're looking for a D, an R, or a name that looks familiar. That's pretty much the extent of it. One of the things that I advocated in the book, only half jokingly, they said there should be no designation on the ballot of political party. Mm-hmm. So people would actually have to know who they're voting for. I think that would make a big difference in our country.
You and I go back a ways. We have a little bit of historical memory, and I can't help, and I'm not comparing the United States to the Soviet Union, but I remember back in the day when Alexander Solzhenitsyn was asked what went wrong in the Soviet Union, what made it become the nightmare police mm-hmm. state that it was, and he said, "We forgot about God." How true is that of America today and the mm-hmm. problems that we face, do you think?
I think it's a huge part of what's going on. And, you know, what's interesting, you mentioned Solzhenitsyn. I encourage people to read. Read the writings of, you know, Vladimir Lenin mm-hmm. and Saul Alinsky and mm-hmm. Karl Marx, and look at their view of the United States. You know, this is easy stuff to find. It's not hidden. You can go out there and find it in your Barnes & Noble today. But they talk, the neo-Marxists, about what would be necessary to bring America into alignment in order to achieve their one world vision and their utopian society. And they said, you know, the problem with America is that they're too strong. They have a couple of very strong pillars: the family, the traditional family, and their Judeo-Christian values. You need to attack those things constantly, bring them down, and you will level the United States.
Right.
And I think that you see the constant attacks in our country now. You can't say that. I remember some years ago, the lawyers came to my wife and I. They said, you can't put your Think Big banners up in a public school because each of the letters means something, and the G was for God. Yeah, are you kidding? You can't put that up in a public school. And they said, you know, it's a violation of the First Amendment. There can be no government support of religious expression. Well, I explained to them that the First Amendment also says there can be no government suppression of religious expression. So we had a vigorous argument. I said, let's solve this at the level of the Supreme Court, which seemed bold and reckless statement, but it wasn't, because I knew I was going to the Supreme Court the next week to receive the Jefferson Award. So I figured I would ask while I was there. And Justice Sandra Day O'Connor said they were all wet. They had no idea what they were talking about. Of course, that was not a violation. And part of the problem is we back down too easily. And, you know, one of the things I talk about in the book, I said people with traditional values, and particularly Judeo-Christian values, have to be willing to stand up for what they believe, because the secular progressives will keep pushing until they meet resistance. They will never stop. So unless you're willing to stand up for what you believe, if you adopt the go along to get along attitude, then they win by default.
Right.
You continue to lose ground forever. That's what's happening to the values in our country right now. And, you know, basically, you look in our public school systems, you look in our universities, what do they teach? Well, there's not really any right. There's not any wrong. It's all relative. It's a matter of how you look at it. And those were the exact things that happened to the Roman Empire. And they lost their identity, they lost their value system, they lost their vision, they lost their nation.
Well, theoretically, in America, we seem to have a majority of people who still share those beliefs and values, the Judeo-Christian beliefs and values you mentioned. But are those folks, what, too quiet, too easily intimidated?
Well, they've been beaten down. They've been beaten into submission. I mean, it's not unusual today. You know, you ask somebody a question and who's going to hear me? You know, is somebody going to call me a name? Am I going to lose my job? You know, am I going to get an IRS audit? Which, of course, IRS would say, we wouldn't do anything like that. And if we did, we'd lose your records. But anyway, you know, this is not America when that's going on. I can't tell you how many people I run into from Eastern Bloc countries who say they're terrified because they came here to escape that. They say, the same thing is happening here.
Right. And then, of course, you know, a little bit off the subject is we're becoming aware of the fact that we've got this NSA eavesdropping on every phone call, every email.
Right.
And that's got to be intimidating to people, too.
Yeah, I wonder why we can't just go to the NSA and get all the missing emails.
Right. Yeah, there's so many
they must
things.
Have them, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's so many things I'd like to know that are in those NSA archives somewhere, but maybe they lost the information there, too. Also, out of your book, you talk about something we've sort of addressed on already, which is the deteriorating morals in this country. You know, we alluded earlier to some things that some of the folks on the left have said about how you would bring down our society, and attacking God and attacking the family are surely it. We can just have to go back to the 19th century when de Tocqueville came to America and looked at what made America great, and he knew what it was.
He did.
And
he was particularly impressed when he looked at our schools.
Right.
And he said, in their schools, they actually teach morals. They teach values. They teach the difference between right and wrong.
The Bible was the textbook.
Exactly.
The primary. We're so far removed from that now,
Yeah.
Dr. Carson. How do you get back on track? Sometimes I look at it and I say, it's hopeless.
It does, on the surface, look pretty grim, but I think it's a leadership issue. Right now, we're sort of like a third grade classroom where, the teacher didn't get there. And you have the kids just, having spitball parties and what have you. Well, that's what's going on. We haven't had any leadership, in the last several years. Even going back to the previous administration, and I like George Bush. I think he's a decent man, but he was engrossed with the war. So there wasn't any real leadership, particularly moral leadership, going on in our nation. You go back before that, there were issues as well. And so a country that really doesn't have a vision and is kind of forgetting about who it is will naturally kind of deteriorate into a bunch of factions. And the clergy in our nation has largely adopted a go-along to get along attitude. We don't want anybody to see us as bad guys. So, what the Word of God says, that's old stuff, Let's talk about the modern era in which we live. But without really looking at the consequences of what they're talking about. When we throw away those values that rapidly propelled us to the pinnacle of the world, you're going to see a concomitant deterioration. When we do things like have our Attorney General and our President say, yeah, marijuana is not that bad, I used it, and look how I turned out. Well, that's the problem. And, we have clear scientific evidence that, the use of cannabis in the developing brain is detrimental. And the brain is developing until your late 20s. Well, who are the people who are using it? Teens and early and mid-20s. There's going to be consequences for that. And why are they not talking about that? Why are we more concerned about how much sugar there is in the beverage that you're drinking? Not that that isn't important, but we need to look at the things that are truly having a deleterious effect on our society and stop the subterfuge. And we do so many things to distract people. I mean, the trademark issue with the Redskins. I mean, give me a break. When we've got IRS going on, and Benghazi going on, and NSA going on, and Fast and Furious going on, and a dozen other things going on, and we're talking about a trademark for the Redskins?
Right, I thought that was a joke when I heard it on the news. I honestly did. I said, no, this is somebody's idea of a joke. That's what the trademark office did.
It does seem like it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But if we're gonna penalize the Redskins, are we gonna change the name of the state of Oklahoma, which means land of red people? I mean, we could go down the list. We could go forever on this thing. It's the whole idea of political correctness, and of course, I talk a lot about it in the book.
Yes.
Because I think it's destructive. One of the founding principles of our nation: freedom of speech, freedom of expression. Political correctness is in direct opposition to that. Nowhere in the Constitution does it say you have a right not to be offended. But it does say you have a right to free speech. And if you really think about it logically, why would it say that? Because it knew that some people would be offended. If no one would ever be offended, you wouldn't have to talk about the right to free speech, would you?
Right.
So.
And that is the thing with the Redskins issue, is just simply that some people, we don't know how many, who they are exactly, were offended. And to lose, to give away somebody's property rights on something.
And somebody's always going to be offended in a diverse culture.
Right.
And what we really need to concentrate on is not unanimity of thought and unanimity of speech. We need to concentrate on teaching people not to be so sensitive and to be able to look at the big picture. And, you know, one of the things that particularly the left-wing media does is, you know, they focus on every word that you say, every phrase. Did you hear that? Oh, you need to be offended by what he said. You might not be offended. Oh, yeah, yeah. Particularly people who, you know, are low, not, you know, well-versed in a lot of things. And someone comes and says, you should be offended by it. Oh, okay. It's sort of like the little kid on the playground who was perfectly happy, and then someone comes over and says, that guy over there, he's talking about your mama. Oh, really? Okay, and now I'm mad, you know.
And often there's, you know, the thing that's got them offended, it's wrong. There's no basis for it.
Exactly.
And, you know, whatever it was that somebody said to offend them was actually right. I mean, it goes back to that idea of we're not talking to one another anymore. Exactly. It's just we put up all these barriers about what you can talk about and what you can't talk about.
You got it.
One of the things I've been hearing from people, obviously, you're probably not going to get the Democratic nomination for president, right? I think we can safely rule that out. But one of the things I've been hearing from Republicans is, and you know, these are smart people.
Sure.
They look at the past few elections and the changing demographics in this country, and they say Republicans can't win the presidency anymore. Could Ben Carson make a difference there?
Probably, but I'm not sure that I agree with the premise that Republicans can't win. Because what you have to understand is that in 2012, more people did not vote than voted for either candidate.
Right.
And as I'm traveling around the country, 4 or 5 states every week, seeing just humongous, enthusiastic crowds everywhere. Red states, blue states, north, south, east, west, doesn't matter. A lot of them are elderly people who said they had tuned out and had said, I'm just waiting to die. Those people are starting to get interested again and coming back in. If we can reactivate those people, and one of the things that I emphasize in the book, One Nation, I should say we emphasize because my wife wrote it with me. You know, my first 4 books, by the way, were written with professional co-writers. The last 2 books, America the Beautiful and One Nation, written with my wife, both became New York Times #1 bestsellers, despite the liberal media's attempt to hide and push them down. You know,
right.
So, you know, I emphasize in that book the importance of people using their sphere of influence. That's how you get around the liberal media. You need to talk to your uncle who hasn't voted in 20 years about what's going on. And if he's an invalid, you need to get him an absentee ballot. And if he's blind, you need to help him fill it out. And you need to start talking to people in your sphere of influence, your neighbors, even if they're liberals. Talk to them, because what happens is a lot of people who are liberals really haven't thought their positions through. And they listen to their leaders who try to demonize people. You know, they listen to those people who believe in the Saul Alinsky philosophy. One of his rules, never have a conversation with your adversary because that humanizes them. And your job is to demonize them. They don't want you to talk. They don't want you to. That's why at your universities now, you say, we don't want to hear this person. Right. We don't want anybody to hear them. If they have a business, we want to tear it down. If they have a reputation, we want to get rid of it. This is pre-fascist thinking. This is going on. A lot of the liberals don't realize that. They don't know that they're being used. You know, as Lenin said, you know, useful idiots. We can use these people to actually change America, and they won't even know that they are our puppets and that we're using them. But when you begin to have conversations, talk about the kind of America you want to have, what do you want to pass on to your children, a lot of people will begin to realize that, you know, you're not my enemy. My enemy is this person who's trying to fundamentally change America, who's going to ruin it for my children and my grandchildren. Get out there and talk to people. That will make the biggest difference of anything. The mainstream media is never going to give you the right answers because they're part of the problem. There's a book called The Naked Communist. It was written in 1958. Cleon Skousen lays out the whole agenda, including the importance of getting people in important positions in the mainstream media so that they could help drive the agenda. Well, that's what's going on now. And we need to just move around them.